Okay, สวัสดียินดีต้อนรับทุกท่านนะครับ Good evening and welcome everybody to the architecture lecture series. We have been doing this. This year is the third year that we're doing the lecture series, and exactly this is lecture number 54. Okay, so we have been doing and we continue doing. Providing you with the food for thought, with the good lecture. And today, I'm very delighted to welcome a distinguished guest. But firstly, I have to introduce myself. My name is Assistant Professor Dr. Shimawong Suriyachan. I'm the head department of landscape architecture and will be the host for you this evening. Today we're gonna listen to the biophilic paradigm shift, the guiding development toward human-nature harmony by Mr. Andrew Grant from Grant Associates. And I just learned that he just straight from the airport to here, from Singapore to here, and then deliver the talk to everybody. But before formal introduction, I would like to invite our Dean Sarayut, to do the opening remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Again, so today is quite a lot of audience. So maybe the topics would be very interesting. I think some of you may know from the picture, the garden by the bay. This is a great honor to have landscape architect Andrew Grant from Grant Associates, which is a landscape design who work in the design of the garden by the bay in Singapore, which is I think it's amazing. So I visited there several times and very impressed with the way the landscape has impact to us and the way we can create the space and play with their very precious trees in the domes and a lot of spaces for public outside, including this tree, which is, I think, will bring to a lot of ideas of landscape after that. So today it could be the topics about the biophilic paradigm shift, and I think it's good for everyone who is interested to study in the landscape design in our faculties. And we think that one of the landscape department in our faculty is one of the best it's a course that we have in our school, and we produce a lot of good landscape designer for the site for a long time. And I just welcome you and all the students if you're interested to join us. Please welcome and come often, please. So I will take your time much. So I will give my stage for Andrew Grant and giving a lecture. So thank you, Steve, again for coming, visiting me, and everything else, and giving us a lecture. Thank you very much.
To a little bit formal introduction for Mr. Grant. Mr. Grant is a landscape architect whose work explores the connection between people and nature. He started his company, Grant Associates, in 1997, which has grown international design studio in Bath and in Singapore. He used creative ecological design and design thinking to find solutions to the major challenges of the climate change, biodiversity loss, and improve human quality of life. Each of his projects responds to the place, its inherent ecology, and its people, and promote quality and innovation in landscape design. In 2012, he was awarded the title of RSA Royal Designer for Industry in recognition of his pioneer global work in landscape architecture. One of the work is the Garden by the Bay, And he also a visiting professor at the University of Sheffield, and honorary fellow of the RIBA, and a member of the National Infrastructure Commission Design Group. In 2023, he was awarded an honorary doctorate of letter by Bath Spa University in recognition of his outstanding work as a landscape architect and his passion and approach to nature, creativity, and imagination. Please welcome Mr. Andrew Grant.
Thank you. Well, hello everybody. It's fantastic to be here and to see such a fantastic group of people. I hope you get something from what I'm going to say. I do apologise because I did come straight from the airport. I feel a little bit dishevelled, a bit tired, but hopefully everything is okay. I just realised I did one last minute sort of tweak on this and I missed out R in the middle of the sentence, designed like we are part of nature. So, and the main title, which came from Nam, it really sort of challenged me a little bit in terms of, okay, if we are going to sort of adjust the way we think about design of the built environment, particularly, to be more respectful of the natural world, what does that mean? How do we do that? And it is a big shift that's needed across all sectors of the built environment. And for me, the heart of that shift has got to be everybody has got to start thinking that you are part of nature, you are an animal, you are part of the natural world. It's not something that is over there that you deal with separately. It has to be something that you bring into your lives as a sort of an integral part of how you think and live and breathe and act. And it's really hard to sort of communicate how that works. And I was in New Zealand recently, and there was this wonderful exhibition called Breathe, and it was a curation of installations by this wonderful Marshmallow Laser Feast, who are a group of artists from London. And the premise, actually, was basically this idea, a series of installations which explore the relationship between trees and humans and breathing. The idea that trees give out oxygen, humans give out carbon dioxide, you create this wonderful cycle. And the artworks, these beautiful digital installations, just started to explore in a really interesting, dynamic way the relationships between different parts of the forest. Try to evoke the sort of relationships, the networks. So I'm not going to read all of that out, but it's really interesting facts. You have, we breathe out 30,000 times a day. And with every breath, we are enmeshed and entangled in the living world. And I think that's just so fundamental way of thinking about how we live. We are part of nature. There was a number of these enormous great installations. So that was probably a 6-meter high digital installation that just began to just unravel the sort of the infrastructure, I guess, of a tree. There's a giant kapok tree that they sort of surveyed in the Amazon and used different sort of analysis techniques to really understand what was going on inside and around the tree. So that reminded me of another sort of a artist's quote. It was David Hockney, who's another British artist, who said, "New ways of seeing means new ways of feeling." So one of the things that is part of this transformation of how we think, is that we need to look at things differently to the way things have been thought of for so many years. I'll move on to a less interesting slide. But basically we're all animals and we're all connected to all nature. And I think there's a whole load of data and research now that shows how fundamental nature is to our well-being, to our mental health, to our physical health, to the way we respond to the world around us. And this is just a few sort of headlines, but basically, there's so much research that shows why we should be planning and designing our world with nature at the heart. So when you sort of go around thinking, oh, I quite like being in nature, it's not you imagining something. It's actually your fundamental biology. You are part of that world. Now, biophilia is an interesting concept. I don't know. I don't know how many people are aware of the meaning of biophilia. I mean, I'm not going to go into the academic sort of analysis of that, but basically, in simple terms, it is love nature and the sort of human capacity and need to actually love and be in the natural world. There's a sort of a synergy and a sympathy and an empathy between us. So you think that biophilia is going to be always good. But there's obviously the flip side of biophilia is biophobia, which just adds complications to how we think about these things. Some things in the biological world are sort of scary to humans. They're potentially dangerous to humans. So this is all part of the balancing act. And I think the really interesting thing for me is that it's not just the physical world that we need to think about in terms of what the natural world gives us in terms of food, oxygen, smell, scent, all these sort of things. It does something to our mind as well. There's sort of a mental empathy with the natural world that we don't often really think about when we're designing. I don't know if anybody has actually seen the recent film Hamlet, which is basically a very beautiful, moving film about Shakespeare and his family. So it evokes time in England 400 years ago. And they use a lot of references in the film to the dark forest, to what's within that sort of dark wood, and the idea of sort of the, what's the next step, what's it foretelling, what's the future. And I think that's something really interesting in terms of how we can create environments that actually stimulate the imagination as much as it gives us all the sort of the nutrients and sort of physical things that we need to survive. I also like this quote from Nick Cave, the musician, who's basically trying to capture this as well in a slightly different way. This shimmering space where imagination and reality intersect. This is where all love and tears and joy exist. This is the place, this is where we live. So it's just putting a completely different twist on how you start to think about designing places. So here's me thinking about that in the context of my work, which I'm a landscape architect. And having worked as a landscape architect for over 30 years and thought about the context and the global context that we're working in, I really do believe that landscape architects in the 21st century are healers. We imagine and develop new ways, devices and practices to reset the future, where Earth is shared equally between humanity and the natural world. There's something for me about how we readdress the balance of things. So here is Dr. Grant in a team lab sort of exhibit in Singapore, sort of completely covered in things. Biophilia, there's lots of theories, there's lots of books been written about biophilia, and I'm not going to actually go into any of that, because I think you've probably had a lot, some of you will be very familiar with those. But these are just 4 things that I, from my experience, I think are really interesting in terms of how you create impact. There's a theory there, but how do you get people to sort of start to take notice of it? So in the projects that I work on, I've discovered that if you have a really good name that actually references landscape and nature or animals or something, that becomes a sort of title for the project, it gets a buy-in from anybody who's actually working on that project. So the engineers will start thinking about, oh, it's a sort of living in a garden. Oh my goodness, I need to start thinking about that as a sort of a mental prompt. The architects, the landscape architects, the project managers, the politicians. So I think that's really important. You'll see some of my projects. Gardens by the Bay is perfect as a title for a project. One of the other things I think is really significant, it goes back to that Marshmallow Laser Feast exhibition, is there is something called the overview effect, which is when you start to create an environment where you, as a human, feel small. You're not the dominant force in that sort of environment. And that's typically, referenced from when, the first pictures of the planet Earth were taken from space. And the astronauts came back just realizing how tiny they were in the overall complexity of that environment. Or when you go to a sort of a huge, massive, the Grand Canyon or something enormous, or you see an enormous great tree. These are beyond your scale. And I think my experience, and you'll see some of the examples I'll show in Gardens by the Bay, if you superscale some of these experiences, you respond to it in a very different way. Another theme I think is very, very important in the context of biophilic design is to make sure that you are delivering as much richness of experience, color, sound, light, diversity of all sorts of things, and to sort of really excite and accentuate the way you appreciate that space, your senses. So in that context, lots of landscapes have plants in them. Green, get as many colors of green as you can into your project. Green is the biggest section of the visible spectrum. And it's thought that actually, that's really significant in terms of human evolution, in terms of how we evolved in forests and savannas, and actually started to recognize the different colors of green and different combinations of green and how they reflected different healthy habitats or where the food was. There's so many depths of sort of things you can start to get into. So monoculture, no. Basically diversity, create richness of things, which basically is an interesting contradiction with some sort of theoretical approaches to landscape design, which is simplicity and minimalism. You just have very straightforward lines and simple monocultures of plant species. Very dramatic, but do they excite the soul? Do they deliver all the things that we want from them? That's a question we can ask. Another one, which I think is really very significant, is that when we think about designing projects, it's not just for us. We share this planet with millions of species that we hardly give notice to when we're sort of thinking about, traditionally we haven't. So actually, I have a lot of time for an ecologist who sadly died, E.O. Wilson, who developed something called the Half-Earth Project, which was really, the big headline was, let's share half of the planet with non-human species, whether they're plants or mushrooms or ants. And I would, on that point, I would recommend listening to a very short film with Harrison Ford narrating it. It's called Listening for the Quiet. because it basically it puts how you think about nature films in a different way, because it's talking about not necessarily the big headline lions and gorillas and all these things. It's sort of putting an emphasis on the importance, the prime importance of the smallest things, the bacteria, the ants, the beetles, and how significant they are to sustaining our world. Last on this list for me is also very significant. When we work on projects, the best ones always come from complete integration of disciplines and collaboration and testing the best ideas from everybody's perspective and synthesizing that, and actually engaging with the people who are going to use that space, that environment, that building, that park, so that everybody has a contribution to make to that. Sorry, I just had some space. And I saw this is a guy I saw in Wellington in New Zealand, basically. He's the ultimate biophilic saxophone player. It was fantastic. So I'm going to have to race through some things, but I thought I'd start with, where did I start? Basically, I mean, there's lots of you guys, I think, probably the same age as me when I was doing this, not particularly brilliant drawings, but this was when I was at school, doing my A-level art. And I was interested I started to pick up sort of environmental sort of stories in the press and on the TV. And, you know, I don't know where this came from, but it's sort of this dystopian, weird sort of future seemed to me to be something that's where we were heading. At the same time, I was interested in octopus, and these are all from the same sort of period at school, and designing playgrounds and things like that. So I had an interesting start, I think. Oh. And later, after I'd been through university and started to think about what do I want to do as a professional, I was inspired by the early discussions about sustainable development that came out of the Rio conference in 1992, all those years ago. And there was sort of so much energy, so much really fantastic thinking that came out from that sort of time, that project. And lots of fantastic, if we do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, we'll save the planet. If we had done all of that, we would not be in this complete disaster zone we are today, in the way the planet has been, you know, seriously undermined by, you know, influences beyond our control, but basically something needs to happen. But creativity, science, politics, all came together, and you know, we need the equivalent of that now, just a sort of complete holistic approach to how we think about things. So I'm going to run through a few projects, just sort of like chronologically in a way, or a bit of a mix. But this one for me was really significant. It was a plan for a Buddhist community, a Buddhist retreat on Holy Island. This is an island off the coast of Scotland. And the idea was to create a place where Buddhists could go in retreat for up to 25 years if they wanted to go there, and to create a sort of a self-sufficient community. So that introduced me to all these things I've just been talking about, the sort of, okay, if they want to sort of live off the land on this island, what does that mean? How do they grow their food? How do they create shelter? How do they live through the seasons? And so it was a wonderful experience for me. And it was formative in terms of how I started thinking about landscape, I guess. So all of these diagrams are basically tracing different aspects of how you might think about planning that particular environment. There were many, many more. But this bottom diagram starts to show that actually there were two clusters of retreats, one for male, one for female, and then the holiest person, the person who had been in retreat the longest, would be higher up the hill. So there's interesting things going on with topography and sort of significance and symbolism here. So you've got sort of slightly more shallow gradients at the bottom of the hill where we could grow all of the crops. And as you go up the hill, you can start foraging the wild crops and pieces. But also, you go from a community of people who talk to each other and share meal times into solitude, which I thought was really, really quite special as well. And so these are all diagrams that start talking about how do we manage the water, how much water do we need, how do we manage waste, how much food do we need, what crops can we grow in this environment, how much do we need, what's the area we need, how do we create shelter, all the sort of threads that sort of layer up on top of each other. But as I say, on top of the practical things, it's that sort of awareness of the spiritual side of it, I guess, the sort of mindfulness of it. And the architect was somebody called Andrew Wright, who did these beautiful, I haven't got the images of the buildings, but there were these beautiful forms, very organic and rounded. And talking with Lama Yeshe, who was one of the senior sort of Buddhist leaders in Europe at the time, he gave us these workshops in terms of how to put the human body at the center of the space. And it was very informative to me in terms of how to start thinking about that. So following that, which sadly never got built, it would have been a wonderful example, I think, if it had been. But following that, I was lucky enough to work on a project in North England called the Earth Centre. Another, great title for a project. It did get built. But once again, it gave me a chance to explore, okay, well, if we're going to sort of diagramize planning and design, what do we do? How do we do that? So all these lines here are me just exploring in my mind how we could use water on a site. Imagining there's a river at the bottom and there's basically a hill up there, and so you have everything flowing down towards the river. And this is about, just the threads of natural river streams coming down to the River Don. The idea of we could create beautiful water features and organize that in an interesting way. We could treat the water, the wastewater from the site, and then use that in different ways, whether to sort of create fountains or actually to take it off to irrigate crops. And then there's different types of irrigation for different types of crops. But that sort of diagram has been repeated in different forms for nearly all the projects we work on. It's water. It's a fundamental driver for most projects. And that was a plan of the site itself. It was basically a visitor attraction themed around sustainable development, which basically was way ahead of its time and sadly didn't survive as a visitor attraction, but it now operates as a sort of a learning environment for school children. So about 600 children every day are on this site learning about different things or doing things together, which is quite fun. So we're going to get straight into Guns by the Bay. Somebody shouts if I'm going over time on things, but I've got lots of slides to show. So if the Earth Centre was in 1996, this was started in 2006, so it was a bit of a jump. And it's the first time we'd really sort of started to think about a big international project. The idea being that it's a 54-hectare public park in Singapore that was meant to be a botanic garden and bring plants to Singapore that you would not find there naturally. And, you know, in terms of, sometimes for a project you need a concept to start the whole process, to get people thinking about, well, what's this about? So this is me thinking, well, actually, can we root this idea on the orchid, which is the national flower of Singapore, is the national flower of Singapore. And for me, orchids are fascinating because, yes, they have beautiful flowers, which you can imagine expressed as gardens and special pavilions and features. But the other thing is that they have this really quite extraordinary physiology. So they're able to adapt to most environments. Orchids are the most diverse and most diverse species, genus in plants anywhere in the world. There's more species of orchid than anything else, I think. And that's because they can adapt to different, quite harsh conditions often. Sometimes they're epiphytes and they just hang on a tree and they get their absorption nutrients and water from what falls on them. So the idea of an intelligent infrastructure to support the beauty of the flowers was the fundamental driver of the Gardens by the Bay, which then led into very early conceptual diagrams, thinking, okay, how do we create a sort of an ecosystem here? How do we start to think about creating a carbon-neutral, air-conditioned glass house in the tropics? Completely bonkers idea. But the idea was to try and think about how we could find a cycle of materials and resources that would mean that cooling that was zero carbon in operation. And with that, how do we manage the water? How do we manage resources? How do we create habitats? How do we create beauty for people? All those sort of things. So that was all wrapped up in this sort of very preliminary diagram, which ultimately was developed by, you know, the environmental engineers into something much more real, actually. And I said earlier that one of the key things that we have to do is collaborate. We have to listen to the wisdom of our friends and colleagues and neighbours. So these are the key people, I think, in terms of the Gardens by the Bay. So there's Dr. Tan, at the left. Behind him is Paul Baker, the architect from Wilkinson Air Architects, and Patrick Bellew, who's the environmental engineer. Myself, a bit more youthful, and Neil Thomas, the structural engineer. And behind us, there was then probably several hundred other designers in different disciplines and things. But we sort of led that. And with a garden like this, you know, the emphasis was basically this is an environment to come and experience plants that, as I say, you would not necessarily see in typical parts of Singapore. So we developed a narrative that sort of started to show how we could tell different stories in different parts of the site. Very simplistically, the red pieces there are Plants and People, which was really looking to create gardens that told the relationship of the cultures of Singapore and the plants, whether that's Chinese or Indian or Malay or Western. And then the green side is really the Southeast Asian rainforest, you know, starting to plant trees that are rare. And in the light green, create theme gardens that showcase some of the elements of a tropical rainforest environment, whether it's the trees or the fruits and the flowers or the diversity of palms. So you can begin to sort of build up this sort of story. And right in the middle, the orange bit, was this idea of this fusion, which is where the super trees came in. But ultimately, it is the most extraordinary place to just be immersed in plants and to be experience plants in really lots of different ways. And this is just starting to hint at that idea of the overview effect, the fact that you're in this space, but you're actually quite a small part of it. And the super trees became a sort of a very significant part of the experience and the identity of the place. The idea that the tallest one is 50 meters high, and it's 50-meter diameter, and it has a restaurant on the top, and you get onto the top and there's amazing views. Then you have this sort of skywalk where you can sort of just, it feels like it's hanging on strings as you walk through the gardens. Today, the trees are sort of growing up quite close to the skywalk. It's quite interesting how places evolve. But to sort of show off the gardens, to create these amazing vertical tropical gardens, we had to sort of create some quite interesting planting strategies. We wanted every tree to be different, almost have its personality that came through from its planting. So some of them are literally just tillandsias and air plants that just are cable tied onto the structure, and others are these sort of these matrices of bromeliads and orchids and ferns and climbing plants like the bromeliads and others. So ultimately, they create an amazing effect. And then coming back to the idea of human experience, we just knew that we needed to do something at night that would be really special. So just thinking through how does this place evolve as an experience through the day? So the day, just this beautiful tropical garden, diverse, rich, planted, and at night it becomes this sort of magical, otherworldly place. And working with lighting designers, who have an increasingly significant role to play, I think, in making our worlds at night more interesting and beautiful. This is Karu Mendy from Lighting Planning Associates in Tokyo, who basically started to say, well, we want the trees to talk to each other with light, so you start to play this game, which ultimately became this incredible light show that basically many, many thousands of people come to this place, particularly on big events. It's a great destination at the heart of the gardens, the Super Tree Grove. It's probably 5,000 to 10,000 people go there most nights and just lie on the floor and just experience the view of the trees. It's been sort of really ramped up in terms of the soundscape and the light show. So it's just free in the middle of the city to come and just enjoy this experience. The other big features within the gardens are the conservatories. And I think the one on the left is basically inside the cloud forest, which is, in a way, abstracting a tropical montane, cool montane sort of mountain with all the plants that go on that. And this is one of those elements, as are the super trees, where scale just brings you into that sort of experience of, wow, that's amazing, that's much bigger than me, it's just spectacular. And most people going into this space just go through the door and go, wow, that's amazing. The flower dome is much more about the intensity of colours and beauty of flowers from the Mediterranean region. But through design, we can accentuate the experience of these places. So once again, at night, the Cloud Forest Dome becomes this extraordinary theatrical place, particularly when the misting is on. We need the mist for the humidity for the plants. And in simple terms, it's a building in the middle of a glass house with lots of different levels, lots of different galleries on it, but the whole thing is covered in plants. And once again, just like the super trees, we just had to work out how many ways could we create environments for different plants to grow, from trees all the way through to mosses, which cover the surface of the structure. And to really bring in a diversity of spatial experiences. So this is looking down from the top of the lost world, where you looking down probably 40 plus meters down to the bottom, layers and layers and layers of things you can see all the way down, looking at these beautiful forms of the plants, and being able to get close to them as well as you wander around the ramp. And on the top, there's the lost world with these sort of pitcher plants, these carnivorous plants that you would find at the top of a tropical mountain range. Meanwhile, in the flower dome, they have these pop-up installations every year. They create different installations, basically to encourage local Singaporeans to keep coming back to experience the place. This was a mock-up of Monet's sort of Giverny villa. And recently they have been realizing that actually they can attract other things into these spaces. Jurassic World is the sort of current sort of themed intervention in the cloud forest, and is just perfect. It's like the film has come to life, and it's a bit noisy. We have too many T-Rexes making a lot of noise, but it just shows. This is making movies real. Sort of making movies and the experience you can get from movies, making it real. More people just looking at the beauty of the plants. And I mentioned biodiversity before, sharing these spaces with other species, and the garden's become an extraordinarily biodiverse environment. It's got the largest sort of colony of smooth otters in Singapore, which have become a tourist attraction in their own right. And of course, the iconography of the super trees and some of the other elements have become a fundamental part of Singapore's identity, and have been picked up in loads and loads and loads of ways, in films and everything else, which is another way of just transforming people's perception of a place. Do we stop at 6 properly? Good, keep going. Okay. This is a recent project. This is it's lost some of the formatting. Basically, Singapore has an amazing complex of zoos. There's at Mandai. There's an area where they're consolidating different experiences. The old zoo, the night safari, and all those sort of things. Now, this zoo was basically, this is a part of it, it's called the Rainforest Wild Asia, and it's basically just a piece of land that's next to the sort of the secondary rainforest that is at the heart of Singapore. And the idea was to create a rainforest experience where you would see the animals that would inhabit those spaces. So tigers and sunbears and lots of other sort of, macaques and langur monkeys and all sorts of beautiful, beautiful animals. So our job was to create an environment that became the showcase of that. But in addition to creating an environment for the animals, it was also creating an environment where people could go into those spaces and be challenged. I mean, you can see people abseiling on these. You can see these these climbing walls, and down in here there are, basically langur monkeys, and there's a very giant crocodile down the bottom. So you feel like you're engaging with that environment in all sorts of different ways. You can walk along the ground and sort of just be close to the nature, or you can have these challenges and adventures above. But this is all artificial. This is not a natural cast limestone. It's basically very carefully sort of copied. So one of the sort of themes of biophilic design is, wherever possible, is actually to try and sort of evoke a sense of the natural world. And these are just some little examples of, through design, just creating moments as you go on a journey through this sort of experience. So it's not about, here, I've got a 4-meter wide path and I'm just going to go through and I might see an animal or two. You have the chance to actually get in amongst all of the environment. But one of the biggest things that was achieved there was actually to create a cave, basically, a vast cave. And what we did, we went to the Mulu caves in Borneo and 3D scanned a section of cave, and then brought all of that back, and in our Singapore office we stitched it all back together and created a 3D model, which was then created a series of panels, which ultimately were all stuck together and created an extraordinary cave experience. So when we're talking about creating landscape experiences, biophilic experiences, it doesn't necessarily just have to be planted. It can be quite something else. So this is about 200 meters long. You can see the sort of the corridor as you go through, with lots of diversity of experiences you go through there, with water, and occasionally some snakes and some cockroaches and things like that. And sometimes views out into the environment. But it is, super dramatic, really beautiful glimpses up to the sky, the sound of water. So I'm just jumping through different ways of thinking about how do you reconnect with nature. Sometimes it's simulating a real place, sometimes it's sort of abstracting a real place. So this is in Sydney. This is called Waterman's Cove. It's part of Barangaroo South, which is one of the very successful recent big commercial redevelopments of part of the Sydney harbourfront. And we were asked to design this space. And basically, this whole bit of Sydney is sitting on sandstone rock. So that's this beautiful stone is sandstone. And we thought one of the really lovely things we could do to connect it to this place would be to create this sort of crescent of sitting stones where you could just sit and watch the sunset. There's a sunset over there. And this was, to be fair, this was developing a concept that Peter Walker had developed at a park further along the headland using the local sandstone. But we just slightly formalised it in this place. And, just to put it in context, that little cove is in here. And these are these massive towers. So these, you've got Wilkinson Air Architects at the end, Renzo Piano Building Workshop, Roger Stirk Harbour, and multiple Sydney architects working on this. So it's a real privilege to actually just have the opportunity to work on a space right at the heart of that. And, one of the things in terms of biophilia is thinking about light, thinking about seasons, thinking about what's the space going to be like at different times of the day. So these are some of my sketches, just thinking about those aspects, particularly the sun, and the fact that, the sun sets over that way. So if we could create this crescent, we could get the sunset working. Some early concept sketches, and that's how it worked out. Lots of shade trees, and that's sort of a recent aerial view of it. Looking really cool, I think. Another really cool project for us, another great name, Super Bloom. So this is the Tower of London in London, home of the Crown Jewels, basically a fortress that's been there for 1,000 years or more. And it basically had a moat around it, the coloured bit around the edges of that, which since 1849 had been just grass, mown grass, turf. It was sort of drained by the Duke of Wellington because it was getting smelly. But anyway, what the intent was to create a really dramatic change in that space to celebrate Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. So we worked with a planting designer called Nigel Dunnett, who specialises in mixes of amazing flowers, annual flowers. And we just filled the moats with this incredible display of flowers for the summer. And it was really, lots of people came in, lots of people loved it. Great for bees. And at night it was transformed into another extraordinary experience. And we had, some little interventions, sort of sculptures that sort of punctuated it. We had sound in there as well. And what's interesting, it was meant to be just for the summer, but the Historic Royal Palaces saw the benefits of this, and now we're working on a complete long-term permanent scheme, which will transform the moat into a matrix of natural habitats, wetland habitats. So, in effect, it's going to become a nature reserve, within which we could tell the stories of this the history of this amazing place. I'm going to go to India now. This is sort of the Terminal 2. Terminal in a garden. The one's a great name again for us, and that came from the client. Bangalore is the garden city of India, so they wanted to celebrate that in the way the terminal was developed conceptually. So, working very carefully with the architects, SOM, they developed this very, very stripped back, very calming architectural envelope, which is using a lot of bamboo. And then our intention was to create a number of sort of striking landscape interventions as you walked through the terminal. As you went on your journey as a passenger, you'll come across different things. So this is in the check-in hall, these hanging bells, which are incredibly dramatic when you see them. And this was my sketch, and basically the idea was we wanted to wrap the whole terminal in what we call the forest belt, which would be incredibly biodiverse. As many plant species as we could get from the region would go into that belt. Then in here, you can imagine going through check-in hall, through security, through the retail, into the lounges, to the gates, to your plane. So that was the conceptual narrative. Is how do we, every moment, every piece of that journey had a landscape experience. It was not about the architecture. So these are just some of the diagrams that we developed. Phase 1 was built, and we're currently working on phase 2 here. But one of the big things, how do we get impact in the check-in hall, where you've got lots of people running around and security and visibility. So the idea of actually having a landscape that was suspended, hanging down into the space, became one of the driving ideas. And we tested lots of sort of ways of doing this. Developed lots of concepts and technical details. And ultimately, they just occupy these spaces. They become these amazing wayfinding devices, guide the eye to water features at the end. And this is effectively the route to the security. So rather than just the usual lots of bits of barriers and things, this is a green journey, calming journey beneath these amazing bells. And then using the natural materials of the area, the colours of the earth, became a sort of another significant part of this story. And then in the forest belt, the idea that we create a sort of an abstract version of the Karnataka landscape, and populated with incredible pavilions. And you can get out, you basically cross this to get to the plains, but you can also get out and walk through these sort of spaces. So the whole thing is really very rich as a sort of landscape experience. This is in the heart of the retail, so the cascading waterfalls. So you can actually, when you're arriving, you actually see into some of these spaces as well as when you're departing. Am I okay to keep going? You tell me to stop whenever. One more. I'll just do Monaco, because one of the lovely things. Well, my job is I've worked all around the world and lots in Asia and obviously Australia. This is in Europe. So Monaco, tiny state, 2 square kilometres basically, and they asked us several years ago to come up with a landscape and biodiversity vision for Monaco, in recognition that it is incredibly dense in terms of its urban form, very little green space, very little shade, and very little biodiversity. So the Prince is particularly interested in the environment, and so we were asked to sort of come and try and find a way of just stitching things back together, and in effect, reconnecting the mountain backdrop of France to the sea, and get this sort of ecological corridors connecting across that sort of space. And reflecting on this, that Monaco's just got this amazing, beautiful history in terms of how people have lived there for centuries because of its beauty and its climates and its views. So this is a diagram that I came up with, which was starting to draw back in the old valleys, the vallons, the river corridors that connected from the upper mountains to the sea, which have by and large been blocked or built over. So could we reopen those? And to create sort of almost sort of like surgical intervention, so we could get wildlife corridors and green connections and shaded streets just starting to navigate and permeate through the urban fabric. So that any journey through this city would have the landscape experience, just as we were exploring with the airport's terminal. How do we do the same within a piece of city? And recognizing that sometimes it might just be a single tree or a beautiful piece of planting on a balcony, all these sort of elements. And at the heart of it, and this has been the fun thing, is to go back to using limestone and to recognize that limestone, which is the foundation of Monaco and the mountains behind, supports an incredible diversity of plants and biodiversity. So we created these, what we call the monacolites, as a way of creating different sort of abstract versions of these habitats as you come from the mountains and the forests all the way into the sea. So we're building prototypes of these at the moment, so that'll be a fun thing to see next. So I think I'll stop there. I have other things I could show, but I think that gives you a diversity, I think, of things. No? You want to keep going? Okay, well, if everybody's happy to do that. This slide still belongs to Monaco. And I put it in because it just reinforces that idea of collaboration and teamwork, and the fact that to deliver these, multifaceted projects in urban environments requires extraordinary diversity of skills and knowledge. So I think this is a team we put together. I think there are 13 consultants working on the Monaco project. And it's been fantastic sort of journey. Similarly, Gardens by the Bay, wonderful collaboration in terms of getting everything working together. But the truth is, I mean, I'm a landscape architect. I know bits of all of these things, but I don't know enough. So you've got to have the humility to know when to ask for help. Particularly some of the, really important things like soils and biodiversity ecology. So I've just got three quick projects that just highlight biodiversity, which is a very important part of our practice in terms of how do we support biodiversity, how do we celebrate it. And on the back of Gardens by the Bay, this is going way back into like 2010 or something, I can't remember. We were asked to do an environmental framework for the Endau Rumpin National Park in Malaysia, which is one of the, sort of large space, one of the last places in Malaysia where you've got wild tigers that need, I think it's 25 square kilometers for one tiger. There's something like that. So you get into this sort of realm of thinking and strategically thinking. This overview effect again is what's my role in trying to sort of plan and think about a piece of planet to restore its biodiversity. And in this instance, finding a way of actually creating an ecological narrative that links the forests to the islands, to the reefs. So this amazing piece of, start talking about the ecosystem of that place in an interesting way. In a similar way, in Madagascar, we are working with Bristol Zoo on the conservation of the blue-eyed black lemurs, which are endangered species. And we've helped design and deliver a new research station. And in a way, it's our giving back to things. And they're extraordinarily beautiful animals. One of the few primates with blue eyes. And a recent project in Singapore, it's called, this is another one, great name, the Reef Keppel. It's basically a housing project. But to optimize the sort of the amenity space, we created this long pontoon. You can just see it on the end panel there, where there's all the sort of swimming facilities, sort of play areas for kids, lap pools, spa areas, all in this big linear landscape. And we thought it'd be really cool to actually just celebrate the natural planting and species of this piece of tidal water. So we created this amazing sort of green wall along the edge, which is basically native species that are partially in and out of the sort of tidal range. And then at one end of the pontoon, we've created this artificial coral reef. So this is actually, it's only been in place a couple of years, but basically it's this incredible magnet of fish that people living here can come and just look down into this incredible sort of experience of corals and all the sort of the life that goes with that. So this is, in a way, the inverse of the big, super awesome mountains. It's actually just bringing the beauty of detail to focus in a particular place. So let me finish. This is my home city of Bath. And so there's a concept that I have been talking about called landscape city. And it's the idea that, rather than thinking of cities as just a collection of buildings and streets, which is how we've come to think about them, why not think of them as the inverse? They are formed around landscapes and on landscapes and within landscapes. And Bath is quite an interesting concept for that because it is a World Heritage Site. a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The whole city and its perimeter landscape is part of that sort of designation. And just jumping around here, but basically it has an incredibly strong Georgian character that sort of gives the bones to the historic designation. And amazing sort of landscapes, like this is Prior Park, Capability Brown landscape. But this is a map of the city, and the red zone is the World Heritage Site, and then the purple edge is basically the World Heritage Site setting. So looking after the landscape of this is a fundamental part of what's required for the city. And so basically just understanding what is it that makes it special. So it's topography and geology and the way the water flows through. These are very simple sketches I did just to illustrate the point, but the ecological infrastructure and the geological infrastructure are the foundations of the city and give it its sort of visual complexity and beauty, and particularly when you then blend in these incredible buildings, all made from the local stone. But we have our challenges. We've got these incredible set pieces. This is the circus. So looking ahead to this idea of transformation, what do we need to do to these streets and places to make them more resilient for climate change? And accept that these incredible plane trees have probably got another 15 years or 20 years life. What happens when they have to go? So these are all the challenges we're looking at. And for us, we've been looking at how to transform historic streets, make them more biodiverse, bring in more sustainable urban drainage, make them more seasonal, resilient, more biodiverse. And the last thing I was going to show you is a project that we run in Bath called the Forest of Imagination, which is like a pop-up art festival. We've been doing it for 12 years. And it goes to different places every year, but it's really about just celebrating the beauty of the city, but making people think differently about it in the context of nature.
Where are we? What is the time? How far have we wandered? And who will finish our rhymes?
There is this feeling, it's like a rhythm, almost like a piece of music or something that has been put together. So mine is the hurrah as you come in.
How do we represent nature? I mean, there's so many things you could talk about. A story about Bath and its ecology, a story about design and the tension between formality and informality, referencing, nature.
Assembled in the forests this year as an invitation to the whole community to really think about coming together to explore these important themes around nature, imagination and well-being.
So something that is in your head when you go in, you don't have to know what it means. You just have to go in and wonder.
I mean, it's all layered and it's really hard to explain.
When you come into the room, you just feel in a new place. It's nothing that you would have expected walking into the room. So it's nature out of context.
The messy, beavery world, because they create a mess, basically, beavers, to a large extent. But that mess creates really vibrant habitats for many other species.
You have to get down, you have to crawl, and that's what makes it interesting. Then you're transported into another, underworld.
What's our relationship to nature? How does it work in terms of the way we design and create places? We've got that amazing dialogue going on here.
People always think because you have colour, it's for children. I mean, it is just for people, and absolutely for every age.
You come in and you have a new horizon line, you have a new perspective on things.
This wonderful opportunity to contrast this absolutely exquisite crystal symmetrical chandelier with something that's wilder.
This represents a 250-year-old beech tree. What we're doing is honoring the life and the time of this tree, which matches the 250 years of the assembly rooms.
What I'd like is people think about their own relationship with nature, and even in a little way, even on a terrace, even on a balcony, you can have that beautiful joy. The bees can come to you if you just made the effort and put the flowers out there and the things that they like.
Amazing input from lots of people. An incredible sort of generosity really across multiple organisations and individuals to pull it together.
The creative community that comes together to make it happen every year is really special. And you do it because you get to see the schools come in, you get to see the families come in, and you get to see them be transported. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's about the imaginations, how do you get people thinking differently.
So yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly well-organised way of doing something, and unusual. And so at first it's quite hard to navigate because there's lots of different things going on, and you're like, is this all gonna, and then when it comes together you think, wow, that was genius.
We are all connected to the nature, that it's in our DNA, we share this, and when we're in nature, even if we're inside with this nature, there is a connection.
So, thank you for being so patient.
Okay, I think everybody get a good picture of how and what is biophilic, and now it's time for Q&A. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. And yeah.
Hello, my name is Mincy, and I'm a graduate student in Chula, and I did research about the biophilic architecture for my master thesis. So when I was doing my thesis, I kept wondering about the scale of the biophilic, and after listening to your presentation, especially from the landscape perspective, so should the ecological system and the biodiversity be treated as the core urban infrastructure rather than the amenities within the urban development, like projects?
Yeah, I think that's where my head is at these days, is that you have to get the fabric, the infrastructure or green space of ecological systems, of integrated systems of water, biodiversity, materials, at the same time as human enjoyment. If we don't do that, then we're just doing the same old stuff, which is roads and streets and pipes and buildings, which is still significant, but actually, we need to sort of readdress where the balance is, where we've got it wrong, which is the lack of foresight in proper landscape infrastructure, green-blue infrastructure in urban environments.
Yeah, that's it. My question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm a student from America, actually, but I want to know your thoughts on sort of advertising this way of design to people, and like the possibility of integrating it with themed entertainment, for example, or like a lot of these I saw they had like sculptures and ways to kind of bring people in. But I guess your thoughts on sort of balancing that with the fact that, at least in my school, I have seen a lot of push towards minimalistic design and sort of straightforward, just looking at the like feasibility of how it works. But yeah, I want to know your thoughts on how to sort of do that.
It's an interesting tension at the moment because, everybody's looking for how do you make the most efficient buildings, for instance. how do you strip everything back so that it's clean lined and there's no fuss. And I think that's fine for buildings, but I think for landscape it's a completely different thing. I think we should be making more mess and more diversity and more joy. Actually, it's more joyful and more. I think we underestimate the sort of significance of our sensory experience as we move through spaces, particularly urban spaces. And the more we can stimulate through scented experiences or amazing colours or things that change, the better. But I mean, the question about how do we advertise this type of design is an interesting one. We've got 30 years of experience in our practice, and we've never really published anything properly, sort of advertised things. We have a website, but I think with 30 years of material, I think we're probably going to have to do something about that. But it's a symptom of the built environment professions in terms of it's almost like a pecking order. But it's also probably more to do with numbers. So, for instance, in the UK, and this is very approximate numbers, but let's say there are 80,000 professional engineers, 50,000 professional architects, and probably less than 10,000, more like 5,000 landscape architects. And so your voice is always, there's a million other people out there just there before you saying things. And you've also got the inertia of people in significant, myself is included, who leading projects based on education, 30, 40 years ago, and not able to adjust to the way we need to rethink how we do things. So hopefully you'll be one of those people who just completely change the model. Sorry, that was a bit roundabout, but very good point in terms of how do we promote it as a concept, as a principle.
Hi, I'm a Bangkok-based landscape architect in Thailand. Firstly, I would like to say that I'm really impressed to your slides, especially the sketches. It's very outstanding. So my question is, do you have any tips or tricks to create good sketches? What do you do before you get a new idea? Relax, watch a movie, or study seriously on case study, or looking for other projects?
No, well, thank you for pointing out the sketches. I mean, they often get commented on, and the fact that they are so rough, and they come from a intuitive place in a response to whatever's going on in my head at that particular time and my understanding of the challenge. But I don't know how to explain how I do it. There's no external stimuli. Put it that way. But what I would basically, the key I think is finding a way of communicating the idea in your head as simply and quickly as possible, and see what comes from that. So many drawings and diagrams, and I think especially computer-based drawings are so elaborate and so rich in information that you just lose the point sometimes in terms of what is it we were trying to do. Beautiful animations and models and all sorts of things, but sometimes it just doesn't tell the story that you want to tell.
Hi, I'm teaching at the Landscape Architecture Department here at the lab. Thank you for your presentation, and I really appreciate many of your projects that you're kind of like a nature advocate, and I cannot agree more that landscape architect will be the healer like today and in the future. So I particularly like the project in the bungalow in the airport.
Yes.
Because I think that kind of really challenging place when people travel and they're going to be in the kind of enclosed space for like 0 hours and sometimes like 20 hours or something. So I heard that it's kind of like the place that people get anxiety very often. So when you have green space, it's kind of like connect you with the nature before you have to be disconnect with the nature. My question is about that project, and I also have another question. So, so when you put, I mean, we don't really see much of the real green space inside the airport because of the security problem and the high maintenance. So how do you convince and come up with that kind of green forest belt and all that forest wrap and everything? And you want me to ask the second question now?
Go ahead, yeah,
Okay.
go for it, yeah.
So I agree, very agree with you about that. We should deliver equal opportunities for human and non-human species, and that's something that I really believe and try to do it. But when you're doing something like, especially in the urban area, most people who I agree that grow up in the urban area, they do not feel like non-human species belong in the urban area. So how do you, I know you have like long experience and reputation that you can convince them, but can you give any advice how to do that?
So I suppose, I mean, so biodiversity in urban environments and how to create habitats that people feel comfortable with is an interesting challenge, because you engage with all those issues of perceived safety, the thing we're talking about with Shakespeare's world of, you know, is it too scary? Are there things going on here? But I do believe that you know, there's a necessity. I think people are seeing the necessity to actually create adaptive environments within urban areas, particularly wetlands and landscapes that deal with water, which I know you've got lots of great examples here in Bangkok. And that I certainly in the UK, that's also driving a lot of, you know, sort of urban habitat development. So I think it's happening because we need to do it, and people are adapting to that. So for the Karnataka T2, how did we convince the client to do all those things? Is that the question? Well, sometimes you have a client who basically sets the vision, and you're always just trying to chase that and see how far you can push it. And in this instance, we had an exceptionally visionary client head who basically just saw this as the terminal in the garden, the architecture secondary. How do we create moments of that people will enjoy, remember, sort of be calmed by the experience? How do we create this sort of effectively a botanic garden in the forest belt? And they supported all the way, basically. So we were lucky.
Yeah. So even we kind of seem crazy right now that we want to design some landscape for snake or some other non-human species, but we keep doing it because it's the right way to do it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one last question, if anybody. No? Oh, you okay.
I'm so sorry, you must have been so tired. But, it inspired me a lot when you say that, landscape now, we shouldn't stop as just sustainable. We have to go beyond and regenerating and healing. But, what is the key to achieve that goal, or maybe, some good standard practice or some mindset would you suggest for us fellow architects to develop one in order to achieve that?
So, well, it comes, I mean, at the heart of it, it comes from you. What do you want to do? And that's what I was trying to, not very well, explain my journey. From just getting a sense of there's something wrong when I was a student, that we need to do something about it. And then bit by bit, learning through my career as to how to express that and find ways of addressing that in different formats. And I've been very lucky to have the opportunity to do that in different places, different worlds, different types of projects. But ultimately, it becomes from you and your drive and your sense of, vision for the future, and hold on to that. It's probably not very helpful, but I do believe that. I do believe that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think it's about time, and it's time for the conclusion. And thank you everybody for participating in this lecture series. And I have some announcement that we will have another lecture next Wednesday.